Hello and welcome back to the studio. I am excited today to dive into this more intermediate style landscape, and we're just going to dive right in. So let's talk about the colors we're going to use to start. We're going to be using transparent yellow, which most of these colors, if you've done any of my tutorials before, are going to be very familiar to you. Sap green, perylene green, I believe we'll be pulling in. That's a little bit more tentative. Ultramarine blue, and quinacridone red. Now, could you do this tutorial with just the three primary colors? Yes, you can. However, I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to. We've done a lot of limited color palettes in the past. Sometimes it's nice to just take advantage of the colors that you have at your disposal. So we'll be mixing these together in a little bit. I also have a sketch, a template for this landscape available for you in my shop, and I'll have that linked down below. So we've got kind of this petite springtime view where we've got this tree, we've got some hills, but we also have some cute little sheep. Now, in order to maintain their white wool, I'm going to be using some masking fluid. The click you just heard was it opening. I do have a full video about how to use masking fluid without destroying your brushes. You can also use like silicone brushes. You can purchase those. I'll have those linked. But I'm just going to put a quick wash of masking fluid on top of each little sheep, and that will allow me to work the rest of the piece without having to really think about it until the very end. All right, we've just got this nice little cluster. Now I'm going to add a couple more dots here just to add a little bit of shimmer. We're going to have, because it's kind of spring, we're going to have some nice flowers throughout, and I'm just going to follow. I don't want to exactly follow the sheep because I don't want those to be kind of confused, and I'm going to make sure that these dots are much smaller. And I'm kind of I'll do a cluster of a couple of them, and then I kind of move on, maybe 1, 2, and then a little cluster, and then one over here. I'm avoiding this shadow area because they won't shine in the same way in the shadow of the tree. All right, and a few more back here just to keep it consistent. We won't have as many back here. All right, and we'll just kind of fade off. So we just have a lot of random little dots kind of scattered around everywhere. And we'll give that just a moment to dry while we work on our sky. As always, I like to work kind of top down with my watercolors. And I'm going to start with our ultramarine blue. We're going to grab some of this perylene green, which just moodies this up nicely. And just a touch of our quinacridone red. And just to show you what we started with, that's where we started. This is where we left off. And we're just going to transfer that over, add in the sky real quick. We're not going to do any clouds or anything fancy because we do have some leaves in here that we're going to want to add in, but that's our sky. Before we do that though, I almost forgot. I'm going to take a very clean brush. I'm going to take a little bit of this transparent yellow. Almost forgot what color it is. And I'm adding it kind of to some of these leaves, as well as some of these areas where the grass is going to be. Not every area, but just going to add a little bit of a glow. That will come in handy later as we apply the green over it. And I'm also going to do a little bit on this side, just a touch, and have the sun mostly central, but kind of coming from our right-hand side. All right, you're going to let that layer dry, and I'm going to take this blue and we're going to just apply it to our sky. A little more water, and just kind of spread that around. I'm going to Just let it kind of dance around in these areas. It's okay if there's a little overlap with the yellow. Yellow and blue just make green, and that is not an offensive color to have by a tree. I'm just going to kind of get some of these spots in here. We've got some blooms starting, so we're just going to kind of brush this all together. Rinsing my brush off, dabbing it off, and I'm just going to soften this edge. I'm actually just going to pull this color all the way down, pull the sky. All right, and while this is still wet, we are going to go into our greens, and I'm actually just going to mix these two together. We have a Pearland green and some of our blue in here, pulling in our sap green a bit. We're just going to keep it loose, and by having this area still damp, it'll give us a nice soft edge. See how that's kind of bleeding in? That's kind of what we're going for. You can already see how some of that warmth we applied down is pulling up. And I'm just tapping some of the excess down here. To kind of give it more of a rounded shape. And then here for kind of a hint of maybe some foliage. All right, easy peasy. And I think we'll kind of continue with our top, working top down. I'm going to start on the leaves and then we'll do the grass section. We're just going to pull in that same green and just add more of our sap green. I want it to be a little bit brighter. We already have some of this yellow down here. It'll be brighter anyway. It'll be a little bit warmer. And for this first, I'm going to water that down just a little bit. Dab it off. I'm going to be a little bit looser, and then we'll tighten up some of these leaves later. I'm just kind of bouncing around, letting some of this sky peek through. Just kind of plopping. And we'll go through with a second pass in a little bit. I'm going to add in just a little bit of depth here. It can soften out. But see how we're already kind of forming the shape of some of these branches. All right, rinsing our brush off. And we're going to just go in with some sap green. Why not? And we're going to keep it light, so I'm watering it down. And we're going to just paint over this section. We'll go through with another pass, so don't worry about it being, it's a little bright. I'm going to desaturate it with a little bit of our quinacridone red. And just a touch of ultramarine. So just kind of a little bit moodier. There we go. And I'm going to water it down a little bit. This is just too much. So I'm not going to pull in any pigment for the rest of this wash. We're just going to make this move around. Thankfully, because of our masking fluid, we don't have to worry about fussing around these little sheep. All right, picking up just a little bit more color. Rinsing off my brush to dilute this. Now it's too wet, so I'm going to dab it off. Now I'm going to take some extra pigment and I'm just going to add it to these corners to kind of frame everything in. Pulling in a little bit of our leaf color. So it did deepen it a little bit. I'm just going to kind of let that be framed out a bit. Okay, we'll do another pass, so don't worry if it looks a little bit blotchy. With each pass of color, it'll kind of come together. And a pass is just a layer of paint. All right, it is a new day, and if the landscape looks a little different, we had a little mishap with the previous one, so I just followed the same exact steps, and we're back. All right, so backing up a little bit while this dries, I'm gonna work down here. I'm gonna go back to my slightly bigger brush. I had pulled out my size 6, but now I've got my size 10, which is pretty much what I've been working with for this painting, as long as I am remembering what I did with you guys correctly. And I'm going to just take a quick glaze and kind of curve out some of this this hill section, and then frame in this area just a little bit. So I don't have a lot of color on my brush. I certainly don't have a lot of water, and I'm not rubbing aggressively. I don't want to reactivate any of this paint underneath or pick any of that up. I'm just applying a little bit more, again, just to kind of add another little bit of a layer, add a little bit more of a shadow and a depth to give it kind of the effect of it curving. And now that I have a little bit of masking fluid on these little sheep, that will go a little bit better. Now I'm rinsing my brush off, wiping it off on the rag, pulling across just to kind of help blend this all together. Going back in with our light wash of pigment to do our right hand side. Rinsing my brush off, wiping it off, and using this to just blend that in. So I've had kind of this green section I'm pulling from. It's just about done, but I also want it to be in shadow now, so I'm pulling in a little bit from our blue sky section that we had here. And let's see, is this section still wet? Not really, so we'll just ignore that. I'm just going to add a little shadow under some of these sheep. I wish I had done a few more of these little guys. But I guess I wasn't feeling as ambitious the second time around. And we'll probably add a little bit more of a shadow here, but just kind of getting it started. And we're going to take that same color and start to apply it where our tree's shadow will be. Again, we're still working very light. I'm not trying to not mess with the paint that's already applied down. I'm just going to lightly pull this across. Because some shadows, especially with a tree where there's layers and openings and different levels, there's going to be sections that are a little bit softer and sections that are a little bit deeper in shadow. And so having these different layers, just tapping into these areas that seem to get a little bit bald, adding these layers will help to combat that ideally. All right, I had to take a quick break to take care of the baby, but I'm back. Everything for me is dry, so if it's not dry for you, I would wait for it to dry, or let's just move back up here again. We'll do another quick pass on some of the leaves, and then we will add the trunk, and then we can kind of go from there. So I'm taking our green, so our sap green, mixed again with just a touch of the Perylene green, and then a touch of our quinacridone red, the tiniest little touch. A little more detailed and intentional. And we'll be leaving some areas kind of on the top section where like the sun might be hitting. We'll leave those alone. That's where you kind of start to decide what shape you want for everything. We might still like go in and clean some of that up, but we're just kind of starting to make some conscious decisions about various things. So I'm gonna like leave this chunk here. I'm gonna kind of carve out some under here. This is where kind of some negative painting comes into play. We can use some of that to our advantage, and it would kind of come up here a little and then kind of fade out, and it'd be what's underneath. Rinsing my brush off, dabbing it off a little more. I'm going to just pull some of these up a little more detailed without putting any water down, ideally. Again, this is still watered down. It's very light. We're not over-exaggerating anything. Just some areas we'll start to add a little more detail, a little more definition where there wasn't any before. We're gonna mix our brown real quick, and then we'll paint in the first pass of our trunk. And all right, for our brown, we have our quinacridone red and whatever green was on there, probably some sap green. So I'm gonna pull some more of that in. And these two colors alone should give us a nice, easy brown, but we might pull in, just to cool it down, see how warm that is, I'm gonna pull in some ultramarine. See how that just instantly made it a more cooler, a little bit cozier, not quite so bright. Which is a weird thing to say about a brown, but just kind of matured it a bit, desaturated it a little bit more. Okay, I'm liking this right now. Just trying to get some good color down. So that any layer we add on top will be smoother and happier overall. Also, because this is watered down, since we just mixed it, it's easier to just do kind of a quick pass of pigment and just kind of get it all laid down. Then as it dries a little bit more, we can add in a little bit more detail, because it will be a little thicker. All right, I said this was the first pass, but I'm obviously kind of going in and adding some shadows here. Again, trying to kind of keep it light. There's not like a super obvious light source here, so I'm just going to kind of tuck things away that might need a little bit of tucking. Obviously anything underneath will have a little bit heavier of a shadow, whether it's underneath greenery like right here, or it's just the underside of a branch. One big thing with trees is just keep the brush strokes going with the trunk. And that way, if there's any kind of weird stroke, it looks intentional. It looks like you're adding texture to the bark of the tree. And I'm working pretty dry. There's not a lot of water on my brush. All right, I'm just gonna add some details of like things poking in among the branches. You don't have to do this. It's just something that I kind of enjoy adding in. All right, now we're gonna move, let's do this section real quick. I'm just gonna add a quick wash of the green that we just mixed up. Okay, so that kind of brings everything together a little bit. I'm gonna take a little more of the Perylene green. I'm gonna add it right here and then add a little bit more detail up here. I don't want a lot more detail because I don't want this to become a focal point. I want this to stay in the background. I'm just gonna take a wet brush, dry it off a little bit so it's just damp, just enough to kind of make this section up here a little more wet. And I'm going to take a touch of our red and tap it in here. Okay, now we're going to take that same color and we're just going to softly add that in. And let it kind of come and go. See how I'm just kind of like picking sections and keeping it kind of horizontal. That will kind of aid in some foreshortening. We're rinsing my brush off, wiping it off so it's a little dirty brush. I'm just going to soften some of these edges, especially kind of in the back here. Wiping it off. I'm just kind of picking some of this up. Wiping it off. And take some of that color over here too and just tap it in. And taking a little bit of the brown, I'm just going to add that in the base here. A little bit of desaturation, kind of create the illusion of a shadow. So I'm going to take a brush and I'm just going to sweep along some of these highlighted areas in kind of an irregular way. Some of these areas that we have kind of the masking fluid for the flowers. And then I'm going to take a warm green. So I'm going to add some sap green and then I'm going to add a little bit of our transparent yellow to it. And I'm just going to kind of tap that in here. Kind of like there's just some different kind of foliage in here. Just in these areas that are wet. And I'm just kind of running across it just to, I don't know, give it something, a little more direction. Now I'm going to go in with the smaller brush. I think I'm going to take some of the blue. Just kind of straight from the tube. I'm going to place it around even where like those little white specks are for us. Kind of like little blue flowers. No, this might be a bad idea, but we're going to go with it. I'm going to do the same thing. I've got a clean brush. Again, follow this. I'm going into the shadow a little bit. Coming down here, taking a little bit of this yellow-green. Tapping that in here. Tip. I am gonna take it up a little bit into the shadow a little bit more. So originally avoiding it, But I think to be a little more consistent, it does need to go where the shadow is a little bit more than I have right now. All right, we're cleaning that off, back in with the blue. So we're just going to kind of follow this pattern, and I am putting the blue kind of right where those masking fluid spots are. And we're going to repeat over here, so getting this wet right around where the masking fluid is. And clean that brush off, go in with our very warm green and just tap that in here. Try not to get it too wet. I probably am a little too wet. Look at me, I just did that in a whole line. Clean my brush off. I'm going to wipe that up. You don't want it to look like a line. You want it to kind of come and go. Still looks like a line. Look at me. It's like I don't even know. As I say it, I do. As I say not to do it, I'm doing the very thing. Okay, a little more of the green. All right, I'm going to grab that same, well, let's go back in with our cooler green that we were using before. And just kind of adding a few. The easiest way to do this is to kind of have clumps and then connect your clumps. Just in parts. So we'll have kind of a clump of this darker area here, and we'll just kind of connect it here. Especially where a branch is sticking out. And while this isn't directly connected, it does kind of go underneath what we have. All right, now we're going to look back and see if we need to kind of unify things. I think that we need a little bit more of a curve here still, and it will help to balance out some of this shadow area a bit. So I'm going to deepen this area just a touch. I'm kind of mixing our warm and our cooler greens that we have laying out here. I'm just going to bring that in. Rinsing this brush off to blend it all together. And we had a little bit of red on the other side. I'm going to pull a little bit on the edge here. Which, if you've done any of my tutorials before, it's probably not a surprise. I don't want to run it in too much to the blue that we have, because I do like where that's going. All right, rinse my brush off, wiping it off just to kind of blend this in here. All right, I think I want something a little softer back here, so I'm going to take our warmer green again. Maybe add a little red to it just to desaturate it. And I'm going to very lightly, so this is a very light layer. Just kind of throw some stuff back here. I'm just going to let it kind of fade off. Take a little bit of brown. No, I think we're going to deepen that. I really like that. I think that balances that a little bit more. We're going to mix a little bit of thicker pigment. So I'm taking some sap green, some perylene green, a little bit of our quinacridone red. And I'm going to kind of just wiggle this in here just to get kind of some abstracted foliage back here. And then we'll kind of mess with the edge a little bit. But I think that's what we needed. I'm going to go up a little higher here. And then rinsing my brush off, wiping it off real good. So it's damp. It was just a rinse, so it's not like squeaky clean or anything like that. Take a little bit of the red, mix it with the brown that we had, so it's a desaturated red, and I'm just going to pull this in here just a touch. A little less aggressively than that. Alright, and while this is drying, I'm just going to add one more kind of layer here where we're having trouble kind of covering up some of that foliage, or the line. That harsh line that we kind of have between the sky and the little hill that we have. All right, now I'm going to carefully take off masking fluid. Do not do this if your paper is wet, like I just did. If it's still damp, you're going to want to be very, 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 very careful. So this is my favorite tool to remove masking fluid. It's a very petite eraser, and it has the strength and the friction to remove it, but because it's so small and detailed, it doesn't really irritate the paper. And also, while we're at it, I'm just gonna start taking our sheep carefully. All right, now is when we clean up. So if you place the masking fluid on at the beginning with me, then you will probably have some very stark white little flowers around here. What I would do is then go in with the warm yellow or the warm green, so the sap green mixed with our transparent yellow, and do a quick wash or glaze over it very lightly. We don't want to be super aggressive with this. Don't do that with your sheep. We're going to take a little bit of that brown color, very much dilute it. So I'm just going to take a chunk of it and set it off to the side. Very diluted, very watered down. And I'm just going to kind of carve out some shadows and details for our little sheep buddies. So any little shadows underneath some hind legs. Back here you don't need to add as much detail, but just a quick shadow will help to ground everything. And I'm even going to take a little bit of the brown, a little more concentrated, and to go in with some of these, give them some darker legs. Dilute it just a touch and add a little more to the shadow underneath. Dilute it again, and I'm just building up these shadows to the intensity that I need them to be. So if I'm looking at it and it's like, I still need a little bit more detail here, I'm just going to go through and slowly add it in. A little more differentiation between these two, so I'm going to deepen that one just a touch. All right, to bring everything together, I'm going to grab just a little bit of our blue, straight from the tube. Actually, it's probably what we had for the sky. And I'm just going to add a little bit to the shadow of some of our sheep, just to have a repeat of that color. It's not something that most people would notice, but just something that I like to add in, especially that one that's in the background. All right, now is when we step back and we're like, okay, let's assess. Do we need to add anything else? Do we need to stop because you're prone to overworking? I'm gonna pull in some brown. This looks like it's just kind of highlighted. Wiping my brush off, so it's just a light layer, just kind of knocking that back a little bit so it doesn't look like the sun is shining on it for some reason. Let's deepen this area here. And just kind of adding some of these shadows in again. Just kind of re-emphasize this knot. Adding a little more here. Again, just some horizontal lines here just to kind of ground this one a little bit more. All right, I'm going to call that done. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and that you learned something from it. If you would like to see more tutorials like this one, or you have requests for specific paintings that you'd like to do, let me know in the comment section down below. And until next time, happy painting.